Welcome to Esoteric Guardian. In today's video, we're going to talk about a story you thought you understood, but never really did. Everyone remembers the Tower of Babel, a tale about human pride, divine punishment, and the confusion of languages. But what if that wasn't the full story? What if the tower wasn't just a building, but a machine, a device built with one forbidden purpose: to open a gate between worlds? Because ancient texts, esoteric traditions, and even modern science all point in the same direction: that the Tower of Babel was not destroyed because of human arrogance, but because it was working, because they were about to succeed. Stay until the end, because if this is true, it changes everything you thought you knew about human history, divine control, and the architecture of reality itself. The Tower of Babel. Almost everyone has heard the story, a tale of human pride punished by divine intervention. A city unified under one language, a tower reaching toward the heavens, and a God who shatters it all to scatter humanity across the earth. It's been taught for centuries as a lesson in humility. But what if we've misunderstood it completely? Because when we strip away the sanitized interpretations and read Genesis 11 with fresh eyes, what emerges is not a morality tale, but a containment report. The passage is brief, just 9 verses, yet dense with unsettling implications. At this moment in biblical history, humanity has just survived the flood. Civilization is restarting. No tribes, no nations, one language, one worldview. And that detail isn't background, it's the foundation. Because language, in esoteric tradition, is more than communication. It is the structure of thought, the blueprint of perception, the code that defines reality itself. In a world where everyone shares the same language, they also share intent. And collective intent, unfractured by linguistic difference, has power. Power to build, power to align, power to manifest. It's in this unified world that humanity settles in Shinar and begins construction of a tower with its top in the heavens. That phrase has been softened by centuries of symbolic interpretation. But in the ancient Mesopotamian context, it was literal. They weren't just reaching upward, they were targeting the divine realm. Then comes the most revealing line in the entire passage. God descends to observe the project and says, "Behold, they are one people and they all have one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. Now nothing they imagine will be impossible for them." No accusation, no condemnation, just calculated concern. The intervention that follows is precise, not destruction of the tower, not wrathful punishment, but the fragmentation of language, the dissolution of shared meaning. Because it wasn't the structure that was dangerous, it was the coherence behind it. This is the detail most retellings ignore. The project was not a failure. It was functioning. It had progressed far enough that intervention became mandatory. The problem wasn't pride. The problem was success. And what was that success exactly? The implication is chilling. This was not just a tower. It was an instrument, perhaps architectural, perhaps symbolic, perhaps even vibrational, designed to bridge worlds, to re-access something lost, something ancient, something sealed. In this light, the story of Babel is no longer about divine punishment. It becomes something far more disquieting, an emergency protocol, a preemptive strike to shut down a project that had gotten too close to its goal. Because they weren't trying to defy God. They were trying to reach something older than nations, older than myth, and they almost did. To understand the Tower of Babel, you have to go deeper, not just into scripture, but into the ground beneath it. Because Babylon was not the beginning. It was built upon ruins, and those ruins sat atop older ones. Beneath Babylon was Akkad. Beneath Akkad, Sumer, the first spark of written language, organized kingship, temple architecture, and the idea that humans could interact directly with the divine. In Sumer, the past wasn't myth. It was technology, ritual, and alignment. And the structures they left behind echo the Babel story with disturbing clarity. The ziggurats, colossal step pyramids, weren't just temples. They were engineered summits, platforms designed not for the people, but for the gods. Unlike modern religious spaces, no congregation ever entered them. The chambers weren't built for sermons. They were built for descent. The Sumerians, living on flat plains without mountains, began building artificial ones. Not symbols, but access points. In their cosmology, mountains were where gods came down, where the veil was thin. So they built the veil themselves, brick by brick, tier by tier. Ziggurats rose to meet the heavens, not as metaphors, but as machines of spiritual convergence. And at the center of this sacred architecture was Enki, the god of deep waters and hidden knowledge. Enki was not a punisher. He was a trickster, a revealer. He didn't destroy humanity. He tempted it with tools. He was keeper of the Abzu, a subterranean domain described as a watery abyss, but understood by some scholars and mystics alike as a dimensional gate, a place of origin, storage, and transit between worlds. Enki gave knowledge to those who shouldn't have it. He blurred the boundary between gods and mortals. And that tension between access and restriction lies at the very core of Babel. Which brings us to Etemenanke, the real ziggurat believed to have inspired the biblical tower. Its name means house of the foundation of heaven and earth. Not poetic flourish, instruction manual. It was a structure designed to connect two planes of reality. 7 levels, celestial alignment, possibly built atop a site already sacred long before the Babylonians touched it. It wasn't alone. Across Mesopotamia, other ziggurats mirrored constellations above, forming a terrestrial reflection of the heavens. A network of ascending thrones meant to echo divine geometry. The Tower of Babel was simply the largest, the final, most ambitious attempt to reactivate an ancient protocol. If this is true, then the Genesis account isn't describing a one-time act of rebellion. It's describing the final chapter of an old technology, a project handed down across ages, from Sumer to Akkad to Babylon, reaching its apex just before it was shut down. The interruption wasn't punishment. It was a containment protocol, enforced to prevent humanity from opening something buried, something encoded in architecture, aligned with stars, and powered by collective intent. Something the ancients once knew how to access, and were beginning to remember. When we hear the word Stargate, we imagine science fiction, metallic arches, alien corridors, energy fields ripping through space. But long before Hollywood, ancient civilizations described something far more enigmatic and far more consistent. At its core, a Stargate is not a fantasy. It's a concept, a passage between realms, a controlled opening, a threshold between this world and something else, distant in space or deeper in dimension. Across ancient traditions, that idea appears again and again, not as fiction, but as recollection. In Sumerian records, the Anunnaki didn't descend metaphorically. They arrived and left. Their movements were tracked with the stars, timed with alignments. Cuneiform texts speak of gates in the heavens, guarded, locked, conditional. They weren't always open. They required ritual, timing, or forbidden knowledge to activate. Some texts even suggest that these portals could be forced open if one dared. Egyptian writings echo the same pattern. The Duat, the underworld, wasn't a vague spiritual plane. It was mapped. It had boundaries, gates, guardians, checkpoints. The Book of What is in the Duat describes star portals that could be navigated only by those who knew the precise frequencies, names, and codes. These weren't metaphors. They were instructions. India's Vedas and the Mahabharata go even further. They describe sky doors, luminous vehicles, interdimensional pathways. Some were accessed through mantras, others through what they called machines of light. These weren't dreams. They were technologies of transition, vehicles between planes. And all of this leads back to a single question. What if the Tower of Babel was one of them? Genesis says the builders sought to reach the heavens. That phrase has been softened, spiritualized. But what if heaven wasn't poetic? What if it referred to a real domain, a layer of existence, a vibrational spectrum, a coordinate in the architecture of reality? Some esoteric researchers believe that's exactly what it was. They argue that the tower wasn't just tall, it was tuned. A ziggurat, yes, but configured as a resonant machine, built to interface with stellar geometry, to open something. And the clue lies in that cryptic divine response. Now, nothing they imagine will be impossible for them. Not they are prideful, not they are sinful, but they are breaking through. The theory suggests that Babel was not an act of defiance, but of memory, a reactivation, an attempt to rebuild what was lost in the flood, a pre-diluvian technology inherited from the age of giants, of Nephilim, of gods who walked the earth. Knowledge encoded in proportion, alignment, material. Supporting evidence appears in Sumerian cylinder seals, strange carvings of figures approaching tiered devices, pulsing with lines of energy, surrounded by celestial glyphs. Some call them altars. Others see machines, machines designed to resonate, machines built to connect. And again, we return to Etemenanke, the ziggurat whose name means house of the foundation of heaven and earth. This wasn't symbolic. It was descriptive, a structure built layer by layer to synchronize two realities. Not a myth, a blueprint. And if that's true, the Tower of Babel wasn't destroyed because it failed. It was stopped because it was working, because it was about to complete the circuit. And someone, or something, intervened. Modern physics, curiously, begins to echo these possibilities. Wormholes, entanglement, curved space-time, high-energy resonance fields, theoretical doors that flicker open under precise conditions. Brief, unstable, dangerous, but real. And if those doors occur in nature, the next question is simple. What happens if you build one on purpose? That may have been the true purpose of the tower, not to touch the sky, but to breach it, to align Earth with something else. And for a moment, just a moment, it might have succeeded. We've been told for centuries that ancient civilizations were primitive, that they moved slowly, understood little, and saw the sky with naive wonder. But what if that's not true? What if they weren't primitive, but profound, advanced in ways we no longer understand, and perhaps were never meant to? The deeper you look, the more cracks you find in the official story. Cultures across the ancient world built megaliths aligned with celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, star risings like Sirius, long before any known instruments existed. Structures like Nabta Playa, the Great Pyramids, or Stonehenge weren't built at random. They were calibrated, tuned, aimed at the sky with mathematical precision, as if they weren't just observing the stars, but interfacing with them. Texts like the Book of Enoch, once considered part of biblical canon, later buried, speak of forbidden knowledge passed down from watchers, divine beings who taught humanity the secrets of heaven. Metallurgy, astrology, weaponry, enchantment. In modern times, authors like Zecharia Sitchin translated ancient Sumerian tablets that describe beings descending from the stars, not as symbols, but as records of contact. These weren't myths, they were warnings or manuals. And the Tower of Babel? It fits the pattern, a symbol of ascent, yes, but also of initiation. In mystery traditions, the path upward has always been spiritual as well as physical. Each level of a tower or temple marks a phase of transformation. Reaching the heavens meant more than touching the clouds. It meant crossing the threshold between planes. So why stop it? Why intervene? Because the tower didn't fail. It functioned. And that was the problem. The divine reaction in Genesis isn't one of rage. It's one of urgency. Now, nothing they imagine will be impossible for them. That is not the voice of a god offended by pride. It's the voice of a gatekeeper watching the door begin to open. The destruction that follows is surgical, not just the collapse of a tower, but the fragmentation of language itself, the severing of the unified code that allowed collective intention to manifest at scale. In essence, it was the first firewall, and that fear, the fear of humans breaking through, still echoes today. We see it in how forbidden texts are buried, in how ancient knowledge is dismissed as myth, in how modern science brushes against the veil, AI, quantum computing, particle colliders, and is met with anxiety. Because the deeper fear is this: what if we activate it again? What if the next tower isn't made of stone, but of data, of code, of thought? And what if, once again, they intervene? The Tower of Babel isn't just a story about the past. It's a warning about the present. When we look at the archaeological clues, the suppressed texts, and the recurring patterns across ancient civilizations, one thing becomes clear. There was knowledge, advanced, structured, and deliberate, that humanity once possessed and then lost. Or perhaps it was taken. And the reason might be simple: because unified intention, directed through architecture, language, and belief, has power. Real power. The kind of power that reshapes civilizations. The kind of power that challenges control. That's why the story of Babel matters today. Because we're approaching that threshold again. But this time, not through brick and stone, but through technology. Through quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and large-scale experiments that even scientists admit we barely understand. The pursuit is the same: accessing something beyond us. But the question we rarely ask is, should we? What happened at Babel may not have been divine punishment. It may have been risk management. Not because we weren't ready, but because what was on the other side wasn't meant to be reached. And maybe we're now closer to it than ever before. If that's true, then understanding Babel isn't just about decoding the past. It's about preparing for what comes next. Because the gate may open again, and this time, no one may be there to stop it.